Welcome everyone to the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women's webinar on CTAS Purpose Area 5. My name is Christina and I will be your moderator for today. It is my pleasure to turn things over to our subject matter experts from the Office on Violence Against Women. Your presenters today will be James Smith and Rebecca Jones. Go ahead, James.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the call today, focusing on OVW's Tribal Governments Program, which is Purpose Area 5 under CTAS for FY 2019. I'm James Smith, and I also have my colleague Rebecca Jones joining me as well. And over the next hour, we're going to walk you through things that are different, things are the same, get questions from you, and hopefully equip you to put in excellent applications for this year's solicitation. The mission of the Office on Violence Against Women, a component of the U.S. Department of Justice, is to provide federal leadership in developing the nation's capacity to reduce violence against women and administer justice for strengthening services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And one thing that I want to point out, for the Tribal Governments Program only, OVW essentially has 5 crimes because sex trafficking is included for the Tribal Governments Program. Some key dates to keep in mind: the solicitation opened on November 27th of 2018, and it closes Tuesday, February 26th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please remember to get your applications in early. Other key dates: if you're having technical difficulties or internet kind of issues and you want to do a paper application, that request needs to be made to the response center at tribalgrants@usdoj.gov by January 25th. Also, while you can register for GMS at any point that you want to, we strongly recommend that applicants do it no later than 2 weeks in advance. So the target date that we would like you to do it before or by is February 12th of this year. OVW funding has very many funding streams for Indian tribes, for tribal governments, and below is a list of such programs. OVW Tribal Affairs Division is the division that deals specifically with the majority of OVW's tribal government programs. We also handle tribal-specific training and technical assistance, National Indian Country Clearinghouse on sexual assault. We also have our annual consultation, which will be in August this year again. Also, the partnership with NIJ for the National Baseline Study, the 904 Task Force, and trilateral meetings on violence against Indigenous women. New in the Tribal Governments Program this year, which is Purpose Area 5, you may have noticed in the past, if you've applied, that for lower states it's always been $20,000, and for Alaska it's always been $25,000. This year we recognize the need to increase that as we've added more required trainings. The cost of things have gone up, so we've heard your concerns on that and we've addressed that. So applicants for the lower 48 states now must budget for $30,000 for OVW required training, and for Alaska it's $35,000. So again, when you turn in your budgets, we're going to be looking for that to make sure that you've accounted for that amount of money and the things that we listed in the solicitation. The required trainings for under this purpose area, the Tribal Governments Program, is your new grantee orientation, and if you get awarded in 2019, you must come to that. And you must send your project coordinator or your main person in charge of managing the grant, and also a financial person. Then we usually do our orientations for 2 to 3 days, depending, and we've had them all over. The annual Tribal Summit, this will be our 4th year. Last year, we really outdid ourselves. We only budgeted for 350 folks, but we ended up having 450. We had an excellent time. It's put on by us and our comprehensive TA provider, Mending the Sacred Hoop. And we put that on to provide best practices, let you guys get together and discuss ideas, have experts in the field share their things, other training opportunities, and it's been a really good thing, and we're trying to grow that each year. So we would ask you to budget for that as well. And then the next thing is our biannual sex trafficking conference. I'm going to ask my colleague Rebecca to talk a little bit about this. This is her project. She's very passionate about it. We've had our first one and it was really good, but I'll turn it over to Rebecca to speak on that a little bit.
Thank you, James. For the sex trafficking conference, our next one, we're planning it for early 2020. So you will want to include in your budget funds to attend at least in 2020 and then in 2022. That will be 2 trips that you would have included in this round of funding. This is the first national conference on sex trafficking in Indian countries specific to our tribal communities that we did just last year. It went over great. We had over 500 people in attendance, and we're shooting for at least 600 in 2020.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we want to focus on what's new in 2019 for the Tribal Governments Program this year. Applicants with OVW Tribal Governments Program awards, FY16 are generally eligible to apply for FY19 funding. However, if the applicant has 50% or more of funds remaining in their FY 2016 or earlier award as of March 31st, 2019, you will not be eligible to apply for funding under this year's solicitation. I know in the past we had various breakdowns, but this year we've tried to streamline that and make it very simple. So again, if you have a 2016 award or earlier and when we look at the numbers, you have 50% or more of that award remaining, by March 31st of this year, you will not be eligible. This year, OVW, our acting director, decided to focus on some different priorities, and so we accounted for that in our solicitation as well. One of those is reduce violent crimes against women and promote victim safety. Applications proposing to use grant funds to hire and train 0.5 FTE or more law enforcement positions, including village public safety officers, will receive priority funding and decisions. In addition, applications proposing to use grant funds to establish a domestic violence court or a domestic violence docket will also receive priority funding when we make our funding decisions. And I would just add that if you're going to focus on any of those areas, make sure that in your application you're very strategic and you point that out and you lay that out for us very easily, because we would hate to miss, awarding someone priority consideration if they're actually put that in there, but it's not clear. So we just ask you to be strategic. If you're going to focus on any of those areas, to just lay them out very clearly. Another area includes substance abuse professionals in a coordinated community response to violent crimes and increase victim access to substance abuse services. And for this, applications proposing to include substance abuse professionals as partners in a proposed project in order to meet the needs of victims with substance abuse issues will receive priority and funding decisions. But note, grant funds may also be used to provide counseling and referrals related to substance abuse issues, but not to provide substance abuse treatment services. So just remember that piece. That is a key piece to make sure that you don't include any treatment services in there. Some more key things on the Tribal Governments Program: eligibility, a federally recognized tribe or organization that is acting as an authorized designee of a federally recognized Indian tribe may apply. For new applicants, if you've never received OVW funding before or your last award closed on or before September 30th of 2018, then you're eligible to apply for up to $450,000. For current grantees, applicants who currently have an open active grant award with the Tribal Governments Program, you are eligible to request up to $900,000. But I will also add to this that when you're doing your application and you're requesting these specific amounts, really put some time to think about what you're going to do with the money, how it's going to be structured. Just don't look at it as, oh, I can ask for all this money, but don't have a real game plan. Be strategic. And I know also that my coworker, Rebecca, is very passionate about this approach too. So I'm going to turn it over to her because I'm sure she can share a little bit more about what you should be thinking about when doing that.
Thank you, James. I think it's important to include a planning phase. We know that these funds are needed in tribal communities. We know that our people, they need help. And a lot of times it's how do we hurry up and get what we need to out there and get it in the field and we start helping people. If we're not including a substantial planning period at the beginning of the grant project, though, it can have lasting and detrimental effects to the program overall. The program overall, not just this project, but the program overall, because it never gets a firm foundation. And so it's important to consider allowing yourself the time to plan what you're going to do with the project and how you're going to continue building on what you already have in place and then build upon that in increments without just running and hurrying up and trying to provide the services that the grant fund can support. So it is important to make sure that you are including a planning period that you're setting a firm foundation before you go forward, and that means that you have your coordinated community response on board, that you have your court partners and your law enforcement partners on board, and that everybody knows what's expected of them moving forward, and you can continue to build that way.
Thank you, Rebecca. Continuing on, FY16 or earlier applicants. An applicant who has a current OVW Tribal Governments Program Award that was made in FY16 or earlier may request funding to continue their current activities in FY19. For FY 2017 and 18, in addition, applicants that received 3-year awards under the Tribal Governments Program in FY 2017 or 2 or 3-year awards in FY 18 are not eligible to apply for continuation funding with regard to their FY 17 or FY 2018 awards for new funding. And if you have any questions, if you have awards and you're trying to figure out where you fall on that, just reach out to one of us. I know sometimes it can sound confusing, but we can explain it better in a one-on-one situation, and we can look at your case, because we also don't want you wasting your time applying for something if you're not technically eligible to apply. So we are here to assist with that as well. We don't want anyone spending ample time when they may not actually be eligible. Authorized designees must submit a tribal resolution or equivalent legal enactment from the tribe as part of the application. Please note that tribal governments with an award from 2017 or 18 generally cannot apply through a designee in 2019. Likewise, an authorized designee funded in 2017 or 2018 is not eligible to apply under the authority of a different tribe. And again, if you have questions about that, if you're thinking about applying as a designee or you're currently one, just reach out to us on that matter as well. We don't get a lot, but we do get some, and certainly they're welcome. What your resolution should include. This is very important. The resolution should authorize the applicant to submit an application on behalf of the federally recognized Indian tribe and state the tribe's support for the project and its commitment to participate if the project is selected for funding. It must be signed by an authorizing official, it must be current, and it must be sufficient to demonstrate authority for the application. And I'll back up 1 second and just talk about what we mean by current. If you applied in 2015 and you got an award and you turned in a resolution with that application, you're now applying in 2019, your 2015 resolution wouldn't be valid. And we've seen that before, so just make sure that it's relevant to the solicitation that you are actually applying for in the year that you're actually applying. And if you have any questions about that, we can provide examples and samples of what those look like. Some of the common mistakes is you'll get it in, but it's not signed, or it's for the wrong year. So you just want to make sure, or it's missing, it doesn't have the commitment piece. So just refer back to this when you are getting your applications together, or reach out to us if you have any questions on that. How can the funding be used? There's a variety of things with this program. Our funding stream is very broad, but we do like to focus on certain things, but there are a lot of things you can do. You can use the funding to develop and enhance effective plans for tribal government to reduce violent crimes against Indian women and increase their safety, to increase the ability of the tribal government to respond to domestic violence. And I won't read all these crimes, but the 5 crimes that I mentioned in the beginning. And then again, remember that sex trafficking for purposes of this program is the 5th crime for OVW. Also, to strengthen the tribal criminal justice system's ability to get involved with stopping violent crimes against Indian women. I'll turn it over to Rebecca to talk about some more of these and jump in too.
For this program, we have 10 different purpose areas. Like James said, it is very broad because it does encompass the funding streams from all the other VAWA programs into the tribal governments program. So you can find all 10 of the project focus areas or purpose areas on page 19 and 20 of the CTAS solicitation. As you're reading through these, you can see that it's very broad. You can do civil legal assistance, transitional housing. You can work on post-separation, like supervised visitation and batterers intervention. You can work on law enforcement or prosecution, domestic violence courts and dockets. You can work on meeting the needs of children and youth that have either been victims of these crimes or been exposed to the crimes. And then also within the tribal governments program, it is one of the only programs in VAWA and OVW, and I think like Department of Justice, where you can work on developing and promoting legislation and policies within the tribe to respond to these violent crimes against Indian women. And that's very unique to this program. Like, we have an exception to that lobbying rule, is so that you can work in your local communities around building codes to address the domestic violence and sexual violence, stalking, sex trafficking, and dating violence. And I encourage you to do that. It's something that we really do need to work on in Indian country, is have these codes.
Absolutely, that is extremely important. Thank you, Rebecca. And again, Rebecca mentioned some of these things, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this little graphic here of example. And this is just a small example of things that you can do. You know, batterers intervention program, again, transitional housing, hiring law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, children and youth, supervised visitation, CCR, and just a few other key important facts. OVW anticipates making up to $35 million available through this purpose area, the tribal governments program, and awarding up to 55 applications for up to $450,000 for new awards and up to $900,000 for continuation awards. Certainly, this is just an estimate. We've had years where we've had as many as 70 or 80 applications. And so, you know, it just depends on the quality of the applications we get in, how many we get in, and all of those things. You know, how much we actually award could change.
I would like to make just one point, because I really like this graphic, and I want to make a point. This is really how our programs need to look. All of our programs are based on this coordinated community response model. And a lot of times, if we don't have that coordinated community response happen, none of the components are going to be successful. There has to be an involvement from your tribal leadership, from your criminal justice system, from your grassroots victim advocacy, children's programs, all across the board. All of these systems that come into contact with victims' lives need to be involved in the solution and how the community is going to respond to the problem at a systemic level. So I really like this graphic because it does tell that story. All of it is built on the foundation of coordinated community response, and then you can start adding your pieces that are going to respond to these 5 crimes within the tribal community. For the purposes of applying for the tribal governments program, the confidentiality piece will come through in a confidentiality acknowledgement form. You can find that template on the OVW website, and there's a slide later on that will point you to a link to it so that you can see what that looks like. Basically, the tribe is agreeing that if they are to be awarded funds under the tribal governments program, they're making certain assurances to OVW that the systems that they establish will hold victims' personally identifiable information confidential. And that's regardless of what system that the victim is working within. And so that's that's making sure that any data systems that you are standing up or you're using to track or work with the victims in your program, that you have firewalls and you're making sure that they're protected, that you are limiting access to their records as payment requests are moving through your finance system, that there's a way to shield who that actual person is, those types of things. In order for the application purposes, you'll go out to our OVW website and you'll see that confidentiality acknowledgement form, and you'll need to get your tribal leader or your authorized representative, whoever is authorized to negotiate and submit grants on behalf of the tribe. You'll get the signature and submit that as a part of the application. For the collaborative partnership, this grant program requires the tribe to partner with a nonprofit victim service provider or a tribal coalition if you have one active in your area. And that's to ensure that as the projects are being planned and implemented, that there's victims' voices at the table. For the victim safety and offender accountability, so again, there's a link later on in the presentation where you can go out to our website and see what the activities that we've identified as being activities that may threaten victim safety or reduce offender accountability. Those activities are prohibited in any of our grant programs. If you are including those activities within your proposed application, then you will be deducted for those. There will be points deducted from your application for that. And if there's too many of them, then you won't be considered for funding. So some of those things might be requiring victim offender mediation. It might be requiring joint counseling if you have a court system for, prior to a protection order being finalized or whatever. Then if one of the standard practices of your court is that the victim and offender have to attend counseling together. That's an activity that is identified as threatening victim safety. And so that would not be an allowable activity, and you probably would not get funded. There's several others of them, and a lot of them have to do with the court system. So if you are planning a project that deals directly with your court, you'll want to make sure that you review those very carefully and make sure that you are not including any of those activities in your proposed project.
I just wanted to go back 1 second to the collaborative partnership and mention that an advisory board is also acceptable. I did mention the tribal budget requirement before, but again, it's our annual summit, it's our new grantee orientation, and then our sex trafficking conference. And then make sure that you include the legal assistance certification requirement. In the solicitation, it goes in a little bit more detail on all of these. Make sure that you are reading our section very carefully when you apply to make sure that you don't miss anything important that could either eliminate you from getting funded or just not make your application as good as it could be. And also very important is including the letter of non-supplanting. Like, we have to have that. So it's kind of like, you know, the checks and balances when you're all done with your application, just make sure that you accounted for all of these kind of key pieces and requirements. What we want to do next is, for those of you who are familiar with the CTAS model, each office has a template that consists of a certain amount of questions that each office has come up with. And we just want to spend some time making sure that we go through the template and making sure that you guys understand it, because that is a big part of your application and whether or not you get funded. How you put together your responses to that, how the approach you take, that's very important. So we did want to spend some time going through this a little bit. I will mention that if you've done this in the past, you've noticed that the page limit was always 15. Well, we've heard your concerns through listening sessions and other kind of meetings that we've had, that you wanted to streamline a little bit more. You didn't want it to be as complex and have too many requirements. And so one of the things that we did across the board was decrease the page limit some to help out with that. So now it's 10 pages. We took care of that. And then the other thing I want to make sure of that you understand when it comes to this template is you don't have to actually use this document. It's totally up to you which format you want, but what I would encourage you to strongly use it, because that way you don't miss any of the questions. But if you choose to do a different format, I would just make sure that I have this available so that you can make sure that when you're done with putting this together in whichever way you choose, that you can go through and make sure that you've addressed all 12 of these questions, including the keyword bank at the end. It's very important that you make sure you've tackled this, because if you haven't, you could severely hurt your chances of getting funded if you haven't addressed everything that we've asked. So I'll start with question number 1. Describe your specific domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking and stalking needs issues identified in your tribal and community justice profile that the tribe plans to address with the proposed grant funding, using as much additional detail as possible, including data if available or narrative accounts to clearly describe the nature and extent of your problem. This is a very important question. This is your opportunity to tell your story. You all are going to know better than any of us what is happening in your community, on your reservation, and what exactly it is that you need and what you need help with and what you really need these grant funds to tackle. So this is like the meat. This is where you tell that story and paint a very clear picture to us. But it's not only important that you tell that story and paint that picture, but you're also very strategic about it. Like, okay, this is the problem, but how are you going to address that problem with these grant funds? So it's kind of like twofold. Rebecca, did you want to jump in on this?
On this piece, I would tell you, basically, you know, we're experts in this work. I've been doing this work for over 20 years. The people that we bring in to do the peer review for these applications, they've been doing the work. They're experts in the field. We know what the national statistics say. We don't need that repeated in your grant application. You're wasting time and space if you're doing that, if you're repeating national statistics, unless you're saying this is what the national statistics says and this is what it looks like in our community. So use your local information, your local data if you have it available. Use your local anecdotal evidence if you have it available. Tell the story in your community, or use that in the context of your community.
Absolutely. The next question, describe current and previous efforts, if any, to address the problem identified in number 1. Again, like, it's also very important that we it's important to us to know that if you've tried to tackle this before in other ways or what you're currently doing, that could strongly support your application as well. It's another opportunity to not only say what the problem is, but what you're doing about it. You know, we like to see, for as much as possible, that applicants or current grantees have been very active in trying to address this problem, and that they want to use grant funds to further that or to do more. So it's kind of important that, you know, all of these questions are very important, but I know sometimes you just see a template and no one takes the time to go through the questions. So we wanted to read them just because in a little while we're going to have question and answer. And if there's anything that you have on any of these questions, please take the opportunity to ask us while we're here. I won't read every single one, but I'll kind of pick out a few more that I think are very important, or I think maybe I've seen applicants struggle on, or they don't take it seriously. The other one, I think for me, is making sure that you describe, you know, you have a collaborative partnership requirement. And it's not only one thing to just list who those partners are, but we want to see with question number 6, describe how that collaborative partnership or other methods will be used to leverage ongoing resources, address challenges, and facilitate a long-term strategy to sustain the project when the grant fund ends. So we don't just want to say that we partner with A, B, and C. We want to know what that partnership looks like. What does it look like on the ground? What are you actually doing? How is it going to be set up? What is the basis for this partnership? A lot of times, you know, folks will say we're working with A, B, and C, but then we really don't ever see what that looks like. It's just put in name only without any real substance behind it. So we're looking for substance here, because a lot of times partners can help you achieve your goal in you know, attacking or addressing the problem that you have in your community. And so we want to see the two actually working together. And also when we go out and do, if you get awarded, when we go out and do site visits, or we do desk reviews, we're talking to those partners. And if we're going out in person, we're interviewing those partners as well. I know Rebecca and I are very big on checking on that piece when we go out and, you know, do physical site visits, or whether we're doing OVRs. So it's important for a gambit of reasons. And so I would just ask you to pay special attention to that too, and make sure that it's a meaningful, beneficial partnership, and that it's really getting you the assistance and the help that you need. Rebecca, is there another question you wanted to tackle?
Yes, I wanted to highlight question number 4. This is your goals and objectives. This is what are you going to do? This is where you need to very closely link your goals back to the project focus areas that are identified on 19 and 20. You need to make it very clear what of those project focus areas you're coming in under. If it is easier for you to present your goals and objectives and activities, your timeline, that kind of thing, in a table format, it's fine to do that, totally acceptable, and you don't need to double space tables. They can be single spaced. Just make sure that they're in a font that's big enough that we can read it. But this is where very closely link your goals, your project goals, back to the project focus areas on 19 and 20, as well as the needs that you've identified and the gaps that you've identified in the previous 3 questions. And we're happy to take questions on that at the end of this presentation, so that we're really clear on that, because this is the meat of your project right here. It's what are you going to do?
She's 100% correct with that. I could not agree with her more on that. And like she said, we'll take more questions. Before we move on, I will say one thing too about question number 5. When you're putting your application together, think very strategically about what type of positions you're going to need to help achieve what you want to do. That's very important. Also, look at how much money you're asking for. Look at, you know, how serious the problem is in your community. I think when you think about those 2 things, and also, you know, your goals and objectives, that will help you determine if you're requesting enough staff in your application, if you're going to need more, what those positions look like. Also, it's not uncommon sometimes if you have, you know, industry friends that have had these awards before and done similar programs, reach out to them to get an idea of what their staffing has looked like. Because a lot of times we get good projects in, we get good applications, but a lot of times the grantees have problems implementing sometimes because they haven't accounted for enough staff, or they haven't accounted for the appropriate positions. And so I would ask you to consider that too. We often find once the award is made, you know, in the first year, a lot of times applicants are reaching out to us because they find that they may need to staff up. So, and that's okay. We don't have a problem with that, but I'm just challenging you to think a little bit more about it on the front end too. But that's another important issue. Some additional resources here. You know, we have a tribal government's, you know, grantee guidebook, which you can find here. The FAQs for CTAS, which each purpose area has a section. You can go under and get very detailed answers to questions. Some you may have, other things we may never talk about today. The template that we just covered is here. Other templates, you know, like the Tribal and Community Justice Profile. Even though the timeline is now included in the narrative, we still provided a template just so you can get an idea of how to do a timeline. And since I'm talking about the timeline, I will just remind you. So in past years, if you've applied, it's always been a separate document that was 5%. And then the purpose area narrative was 50%. Well, this year, in an effort to streamline, we just got rid of it as a standalone document and just added it, told the applicants basically to include a timeline as part of your narrative. And so I will tell you that peer reviewers, when they're looking for that, they will know that we increased the point percentage to account for that. So if you don't have a really good timeline, or if you don't include one at all, then you may get scored low for that. So a timeline is very important. It gives us a clear picture that you've thought about how this is going to work, you've laid it out strategically, and then it also helps you. I mean, certainly we're not expecting the timeline that you turn in with your application to be the be-all, end-all of everything. Certainly you're going to have to update it. It's like an ever-evolving document, but we would like to see a very detailed, thought-out one because that helps us evaluate your application.
So like I mentioned earlier about the letter of non-supplanting and the confidentiality acknowledgement and all that, those pieces, that link where it says resources for applicants, that's where those things are at. And that's our OVW website. And you'll want to go there to see those examples. There's several other samples there as well that you can use to complete the different requirements for your application to make sure that that's complete.
And then we also, if you go to the overall CTAS website in the miscellaneous section, we have a past successful application packet in which each office kind of picked the application that was done very well. So you can get an idea of how applicants have done in the past and things they've done to do a good application, just to kind of give you a guide, especially for those who've never applied, you know, before. If you need to reach out to us, one of the spokespeople will be sending out information with all of the handouts for the day that will include our individual email addresses, but you can always reach out to the response center. Their email address is tribalgrants@usdoj.gov. And what will happen is they have a point of contact list for each office, including ours, and they will reach out when their question comes specific to us, and they'll shoot it to us. And then always you can call this number and ask for Chris Alston or Jessica Neal, and they can make sure that Rebecca or myself or someone on the Tribal Affairs team can answer your question, especially if it's specific to our tribal governments program. At this point, we want to turn it over back to our moderator to take any questions from you all.
Great, thank you, James. The first question is, and it relates to the section on the trainings. This, in essence, takes $10,000 out of direct services money to put into required travel funds. So, can travel funds be moved to other purpose areas if a couple of years into the grant cycle you see that you will not utilize the $30,000?
For budgetary purposes, at this point of the application, it is $30,000, and there needs to be a minimum of $30,000 budgeted. However, and there will be a special condition that says that on the award, should you be awarded the grant funds, that those monies are set aside for OVW approved training. The only way that it can be reprogrammed is with program office approval. So it can be done. It's just a couple other steps that need to happen to make it happen.
And just to add on to that, we know sometimes some grantees are really good at finding reasonable travel accommodations and flights and all of those things. And so they may reach all of the 3 required fundings that we're listing here and still have a good amount of money left over that they want to move. So we understand that, but we made this requirement It's just like we did the requirement in the past, because we want to make sure that applicants have enough money to get to the trainings that we need them to get to. And then we recognize there's some other kind of national trainings that we support as well that we want you to go to that may, help you out as well. So we certainly, it can be done like Rebecca said. You just would need to reach out to whoever your program manager is if you're awarded.
One other thing on that, when you are using your OVW travel funds for approved OVW training, that you are not just training your grant-funded staff. These are tribal governments grants, and again, they are built on a coordinated community response. So we want you to be looking at training your tribal leadership. If you have your advisory board, we want you to be looking at training law enforcement, prosecutors, your court systems, all of your systems partners that may need training in our 5 crimes in order to build up your response in your tribal community on domestic violence and sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. Who needs to be trained? Who of your systems partners needs to be trained on these crimes so that your community has a comprehensive response?
We do have another question. It relates to training, and that is there a limit on how many staff can attend each training?
It depends. So for instance, for new grantee orientations I mentioned earlier, we kind of lay out who we definitely want there. I mean, if someone wants to make the case that they want more folks to come, you can certainly reach out to your program manager if you're awarded, and we can look at that. I'm not going to sit up here and say that would be impossible, because we've certainly done it before, but at a minimum, we would, like if it's new grantee orientation, we would definitely need the grant manager or project coordinator, the person handling the day-to-day things of the award, as well as a financial person. That, like, without a doubt, we would need those 2 people there. Any additional staff we can certainly talk about. We don't want to deny anyone knowledge, but we also want to make sure that the key folks who really need that information get the first opportunity. For some of our other events, we're a lot more flexible, like our summit, and I'll let Rebecca talk about the sex trafficking conference, but for the summit, we've had times where all the staff has come, or 3 folks have come, or 4. So we're very flexible, because those type of events, we're trying to train a variety of people, and we're trying to train the masses essentially in things that are relevant for Indian country, and also making sure that our grantees get that training. So it really depends on what it is. And I know with the sex trafficking conference too, that we had a great turnout with that we certainly allowed more than what we would allow for something like an NGO. But Rebecca, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, just briefly. When we ask for prior approval from Sherry Ann, because generally Sherry Ann will say you can have up to 4 or whatever without prior approval, depending on what the event is and how big the event is. Sherry Ann's usually the one that makes that call, depending on the event and the target audience for the event. So that's on a case-by-case basis. We don't necessarily know that in advance.
Great, thank you, James and Rebecca. We have a domestic abuse program that provides services for victims. We will be applying for strategic planning in year 1 to implement transitional housing for the victims in year 2. Are we allowed to purchase mobile trailer homes for the transitional housing needs for the victims? And if yes, what would be the ceiling amount of this purchase?
We can't do construction or renovation. We can't do it within this program. So that would be if there's going to need to be any type of construction where you're digging up anything in the ground in order to do these mobile trailers, then no. That would be unallowable. If you can present a project that doesn't require that, then it could be considered. But again, you're going to want to be clear in your budget what that's going to be. And so the ceiling, for the grant is, if you're a continuation project, is $900,000. And if you're a brand new project, it's $450,000. We don't necessarily have caps. You'd have to make sure you have the $30,000 in there for the training. If it's a sound project and it seems reasonable, it could be considered.
And just to piggyback on that, I had a grantee about 1.5 years ago, maybe actually be successful in getting that. But as Rebecca said, they were very strategic, they were very clear, they laid it out, there was no questions, well written, well put together, very well thought out, great project, great plan. We supported it wholeheartedly without any issues. So again, Rebecca is 100% right. Just make sure that you're very clear, your justification, it makes sense. As she said, you can't have any construction or renovation, so make sure that none of those words are in your justification whatsoever.
Great, thanks James and Rebecca. We have another question. Where do we find the legal assistance certification?
Starts on page 20, at the very bottom of page 24, and goes on to page 25 of the solicitation.
Great, thank you. And another question is the timeline a separate submission now?
No, it used to be a separate submission. In all previous years that CTAS has been around, it's always been a separate document. This year, in an effort to streamline and combine things, we made it as part of the purpose area narrative, because we've also seen for several years in the past where some applicants don't turn in a separate document. They just automatically included their timeline in their narrative. So that's the approach we went to this year. But I will say, as in the past, the purpose area narrative used to be 50% and the timeline used to be on standalone 5%. What we did this year, because we just said to include your timeline in your narrative, we bumped the point percentage up for the narrative from 50 to 55 to account for that. So it's still very important. You still want to put that in there.
Great, thank you. And we have another question, and this is about the required mandatory trainings. The
Okay.
NOFA states the new grantee orientation, annual tribal summit, and the biannual sex trafficking conference. Do we have to budget these 4 trainings each year?
The new grantee orientation will be one time, and that'll be probably in February of 2020. The annual Tribal Government Summit, it's every year, so you'll want to include at least 3 instances of that. And the Sex Trafficking Conference is every other year. So the next time we're planning that is January of 2020. So there'll be 2 opportunities to attend that within the project period for these grants.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, there is something else I wanted to add. For those of you who've been around for a while, or those who read the solicitation in depth, you'll notice that some of the purpose areas may have potential to overlap a little bit. Specifically, there's things in purpose area 7 and purpose area 10 that you could request funding from that's very similar to OVW's funding. I would say if you're having to decide what to do, just remember, you're going to apply to our purpose area. Our funding specifically has to focus on dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. So if those problems are problems in your community, I would use your OVW Purpose Area 5 Tribal Government application to focus on that. And any other things that Purpose Area 7 and 10 can cover, I would do that, so that there's no overlapping there and you don't have to figure out, well, which one do I apply for? Just remember what our funding is specific for and focus on that. And then the other areas, if 10 and 7 can cover those, use their funding for that. Apply for them for that. Again, I want to reiterate, not waiting until the last minute. Technology is a great thing, GMS is a great thing, but it can get overloaded when so many folks are trying to get at the last minute. Also, when you're waiting to the last minute, you tend to rush and you overlook things. I can't tell you, year after year, we've had some great applications and applicants have forgotten one thing because they waited to the very last minute. So it's very important to allow yourself a week or 2 weeks if you can. I would also encourage you to, once your application's done, sit down with the key players to help you put it together. Pull out this checklist in the solicitation. Compare your application to that checklist. Make sure you've crossed every T and dotted every I to give yourself every fair opportunity to be competitive in this funding. So I want you to take this very, very seriously. It's not something you should be rushing through at all. We're here to help. If you have any questions, please, certainly after the webinar, up until the closing date, reach out to us. Remember to register for GMS. Make sure your GMS access is working. All those kind of things that you don't think about. I would also say to you, God forbid you have any technical problems the day of or the night of, make sure that you pay attention to the late submission instructions. And 9 times out of 10, what's probably going to happen is the response center is going to tell you, once they hear what your problem is, they're automatically going to tell you to email your application so that we know that it's in while we try to figure out what your problem is. Please make sure that that is the first thing you do. The first thing you do, because we don't want it to be a situation where you didn't follow those instructions and we can't take your application. So I'm just kind of throwing out things that I know have been problems in the past, and I just want to try to alleviate that for as many of you as possible.
Great, thank you, James. If we have a grantee with new staff starting in the domestic violence program, should the new staff attend the new grantee training if previous staff already attended?
Yes, how you have to think about this is if you have a previous award with OVW and you get another one in 2019, in terms of staff, those are two different awards. You know, if you're hiring new folks, they need to be trained on the requirements of our office and the requirement of having grant funds in our office. They absolutely have to attend.
Great, thank you, James. Another question is, where would we insert the timeline into the narrative template?
Wherever you see best. I can't tell you how to do it. I'll just tell you what I've seen in the past sometimes. There may be an introduction paragraph about the timeline, and then it follows after that. I've seen that, or I've seen applicants do their narrative as planned and then just drop a timeline at the end. Wherever you think is best. You know, I don't think there's one place or the other that's better. It's just very important that you have that in there.
I would do it as a part of the goals. You know, I used to write these grants. I used to coordinate the CTAS process for the tribe that I worked for, and I did it as part of the goals and objectives.
Great, thank you, Rebecca and James. Do either of you have additional information you would like to share?
Oh, I will throw out one more thing that I think is very important too. When you're doing your application, go through, look at all of the required pieces, any possible attachments that you're submitting, and make sure for as much as possible you give them the exact same name that we have listed in the solicitation, or something that no one would have to guess what it is. Because we would hate for someone to get kicked out because something is misnamed, or we can't find something because it has a file name that has nothing to do with the actual document. For your purpose area narrative, I'm going to throw this out, for example, if you're a UROC tribe, you could do something like UROC tribe, purpose area 5 narrative, FY 2019. No one would make a mistake about what it is that you're submitting. The same thing for resumes, tribal resolutions, all of those things. You want to be very clear, because while peer reviewers are very good at understanding problems in Indian country, they're not as well versed in like what we look for in the office in terms of that kind of like technical stuff, like the file names. And so they may miss something, or, you know, our BMR folks may miss something. So just try to give very clear file names to make it easy. Also, there used to be 4 requirements. This year there's 3: the budget and the detailed budget workbook and narrative, the purpose area narrative for each purpose area that you're applying for, and the tribal community and justice profile. We've done something with GMS this year that it'll let you move forward, but once you get to the end and it's time to submit, if GMS recognizes that you haven't done a tribal and community justice profile, you will not be able to submit. If there is not a budget detailed workbook attached, you will not be able to submit. If you submitted or plan to apply for purpose area 5, 6, and 7, I'm just totally throwing these numbers out, but you've only submitted a purpose area narrative for 5 and 6 and 7 isn't there, GMS will recognize that and you will not be able to move forward. We did that in an effort to make sure that we don't get tribes eliminated for accidentally forgetting things. So again, just make sure you pay attention, and that's another reason why it's important for you to give these things clear file names.
Great, thank you, James. And a question came in. Can you please explain the letter of support?
So yes, the letter it can be from 3 entities: a tribal coalition, an advisory board. Rebecca, what's the third?
Nonprofit victim service provider.
Yeah, so, and we clearly lay that out in the solicitation, so pay attention to that section. It can be any of those 3. You want to make sure it's signed, it's on letterhead, that it speaks to something substantial. It needs to say more than we're just partnering with this organization and being signed. That would not be suffice. We would ask you for another one. So you want to just make sure that it's very detailed. The other thing I would throw out that I didn't want to forget as well is it's very important. It's not only important that you do your budget and you do it very good. Make sure that this year we added something new to the budget where you'll be able to see your total at the end of each purpose area that you're applying for. Before, you could only see the total on the budget summary page. So that'll help you when you're doing your calculations. Also, we've added a space for you to add a budget point of contact. That is so if you get awarded, when we're doing budget reviews, we know who to contact. I would encourage you, after you submit your application, if your main POC changes for the application or your budget POC changes, please make sure that you get in touch with the response center via the Tribal Grants at USDOJ email address, or contact the point person for each office that you apply to make sure that we get that correct information so that we're able to get in touch with you right away if we need that. And the other thing I would say about the budget, it's not only important that you do the budget and that you break things down, it's also important that you include a narrative there. Oftentimes we hear that there's not enough space, you are completely welcome to attach a separate Word document that goes into detail with a narrative of all the items that you're requesting. If you feel like there's not enough space in the actual Excel spreadsheet, that is totally acceptable to do that. But just make sure that you're also including a narrative as part of your budget or a separate document from your budget that's very clearly labeled.
Great, thank you, James. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.